Aspen, known for its picturesque streets and vibrant tourism, is now a shadow of its former self. Cheerful sounds of visitors have been replaced by an eerie silence, with locals moving hurriedly through the streets, avoiding eye contact as if haunted by something unseen. When Molly returns after years of absence, she is immediately struck by the town's melancholic atmosphere. Drawn by a distant and haunting violin melody, it seems to echo through the very air. She embarks on a journey to uncover the truth behind the music and the mysterious disappearances of those she once knew. What she discovers is a dark secret buried deep within the mountains, a tale of cursed music, spectral figures, and an ancient force that threatens to consume all who dare to uncover it. The biting wind of the Aspen Mountains showed no mercy. Each icy gust made Molly shrink further into her coat as she walked along the deserted road that led to the town she once called home. Years had passed since she left Aspen to study music in Boston, and now, upon her return, the town seemed shrouded in a veil of sadness and mystery she didn't remember feeling before. As the first houses emerged through the morning fog, Molly noticed something strange. Aspen, known for its cozy streets filled with tourists, now seemed desolate. The few people she saw on the streets walked quickly, heads down, as if they wanted to avoid any contact. The lights in the houses were off. The sound of the wind was the only thing echoing through the empty streets. Molly quickened her pace, eager to reach her family's old home. But as she approached the door, something made her stop suddenly. A distant melody, almost imperceptible, floated through the air. The soft sound of a violin, playing a melancholic and familiar tune. She paused, trying to identify the source of the melody, but it seemed to come from all directions at once, as if the very air was saturated with that music. Her heart raced. Couldn't be. That music. She recognized it from somewhere, but she couldn't remember where. With one last suspicious look around, Molly quickly entered the house, closing the door behind her. The house was cold and dark, and the smell of old wood and mold filled her nostrils. There was something oppressive in the atmosphere, as if the walls were steeped in years of accumulated sadness. Molly turned on a few lights, trying to dispel the discomfort she felt. But even the artificial light didn't seem to fully illuminate the dark corners of the house. As she unpacked her bags in her old room, the violin's melody continued to echo in her mind. Something about that music made her uneasy. Yet, it also stirred a deep nostalgia within her. Determined to clear up her doubts, Molly picked up her cell phone and sent a message to Luke, a childhood friend, asking to meet the next day. Maybe he knew more about what was happening in the town. That night, however, Molly had trouble sleeping. Every time she closed her eyes, she heard the violin's melody, closer and clearer. When she finally fell asleep, her dreams were disturbed by images of shadowy figures and indistinct whispers, all accompanied by the sound of that distant violin. The next morning, the sky was overcast, and snow fell gently, covering Aspen streets with a thin white layer. Molly met Luke at the local cafe, one of the few places that still seemed to have life in the town. The cafe was warm and cozy, contrasting sharply with the biting cold outside. Wooden walls and the smell of fresh coffee created a comfortable atmosphere, though the tension in the air was palpable. Luke was sitting at a table near the fireplace with a distant look in his eyes. He seemed a little older and more tired than Molly remembered, but he still wore the same warm smile when he saw her enter. "You're back," he said with a smile that couldn't quite hide the concern in his eyes. "Yes, I'm back," Molly replied, sitting down across from him. "But something is different here, Luke. The town feels like it's in mourning." Luke nodded slowly, taking a sip of his coffee. "A lot has happened since you left, Molly. Aspen has changed." Molly leaned forward, sensing that Luke was about to reveal something important. "What happened? Does it have anything to do with that violin melody I heard last night?" Luke looked at her in surprise. "Heard Ethan's music?" "Ethan?" Molly frowned, trying to remember. "Ethan, who was a musician? I vaguely remember him." Luke nodded. "Yes, Ethan. He was one of the most talented musicians Aspen ever had. But he disappeared a few years ago, and since then, nothing has been the same." Molly felt a chill run down her spine. Disappeared? How? No one knows for sure. One day, he was here, playing his music, and the next, he was just gone. There were no signs of a struggle, nothing out of the ordinary. He just disappeared. But what does that have to do with the music I heard last night? Luke looked into the fireplace, as if reliving something painful. After Ethan disappeared, some people started hearing his music playing in strange places, always at night. At first, everyone thought it was some kind of cruel joke, but over time, it became more sinister. Whoever or whatever is playing it never shows themselves. It's like the music is coming from the air itself. Molly felt her stomach churn. The idea of a ghostly melody hovering over the town was disturbing, to say the least. Something inside her compelled her to investigate further, find out what was really happening. Luke, we need to find out what happened to Ethan. Will you come with me? Luke hesitated, clearly torn between fear and loyalty to Molly. Finally, he nodded. I'm with you, but we have to be careful. The town is full of secrets, and some people don't want them to be uncovered. Molly and Luke decided to start their investigation at the old music school, where Ethan had spent most of his time. The building, once a place of life and energy, now seemed abandoned. The windows were covered in dust, and the silence was oppressive. Every step they took on the creaking wooden floors made Molly's heart beat faster. They headed to the room where Ethan used to practice, a place now shrouded in darkness and neglect. Rifling through the cabinets and drawers, Molly found a small leather-bound notebook. When she opened it, she realized it was Ethan's diary. The pages were filled with musical notes, scattered thoughts, and scribbles that revealed the troubled mind of a young man battling his inner demons. Luke, look at this, Molly said, handing the diary to him. Ethan was composing something before he disappeared, but there's something dark in these pages. Luke read a few passages, his expression growing darker with each line. He mentions a woman, Emily Harris, says she was his muse, but then he starts writing about nightmares, about a presence he couldn't understand. Molly frowned. Emily Harris? She went to the same school as us, right? Luke nodded. Yes, but she disappeared before Ethan. No one knows what happened to her either. It's like they were both swallowed by something. Molly felt a shiver run down her spine. Ethan's diary, with its unfinished notes and disturbing descriptions, seemed to point to something much bigger than just the disappearance of a musician. It was as if the very mountains of Aspen held a dark secret. Determined to uncover more, Molly and Luke decided to visit the house where Ethan lived. The place was as abandoned as the music school. The front door was ajar, creaking slightly in the wind, and the inside was covered in a thick layer of dust. As they explored the rooms, Molly found a photo album hidden in a drawer in Ethan's bedroom. Flipping through it, she found several photos of Ethan with friends and family, but one caught her eye. A photo of Ethan with Emily Harris. The two were smiling, but there was something odd about the picture, something Molly couldn't quite put her finger on. Luke, look at this, Molly said, showing him the photo. This is Emily, isn't it? Luke took the photo, studying it closely. Yes, that's her. They were together at the time. Something happened. Something that made them both disappear. Do you think the two are connected somehow? That one's disappearance is linked to the other? Molly asked, anxiety growing in her chest. Luke hesitated, but finally nodded. Yes, I think there's a connection. And I have a feeling that music you heard is the key to finding out what really happened. In the days that followed, Molly and Luke began to hear the violin melody more frequently. Music seemed to follow them, emerging at the most unexpected moments. It was as if someone or something was trying to guide them to some revelation, or perhaps to a trap. One night, as they walked through Aspen's deserted streets, the melody played again, this time clearer and closer than ever. The music was hypnotic, drawing them toward a trail that led out of town into the mountains. This can't be a coincidence, Molly said, feeling her heart race. Someone is leading us somewhere. We need to follow. Luke, though reluctant, agreed. But we have to be prepared. We don't know what we'll find. The trail led them to a hidden cave in the mountains, a place that, according to local legends, had been avoided by the townspeople for generations. It was said that the cave was haunted, that those who entered never returned. But the music continued, louder and louder, echoing off the mountain walls as if it were being played inside the cave. Molly and Luke hesitated at the entrance. Curiosity and the need for answers pushed them inside. The cave's interior was dark and cold, with moisture dripping from the stone walls. The violin's melody seemed to come from all directions, enveloping and oppressive. After a few meters, they found a small group of people gathered around a fire. The fire cast strange shadows on the cave walls, and the people's faces were serious and focused. Among them, Molly recognized some local musicians she knew from her youth. "What are you doing here?" Luke asked, his voice echoing in the cave. One of the women, a violinist known as Margaret, looked up, her eyes shining with a mixture of fear and resignation. "We're trying to prevent the curse from spreading," she said, her voice low and tense. "Ethan's music, it's cursed, carries the pain and despair of his soul, and those who listen to it for too long end up being consumed." Molly felt her blood run cold. But why keep playing it? Why not stop? "Because stopping would mean letting it loose," Margaret replied, her expression grim. "We're trying to contain it, keep it here. But it's getting stronger, and we don't know how much longer we can hold it." Luke looked at Molly, and both understood the gravity of the situation. Ethan's music wasn't just a sad melody, it was a cry for help, a desperate attempt to escape something that had trapped him. And now it was trying to drag others into the same fate. Fire in the cave crackled softly, casting dancing shadows on the stone walls as the group of local musicians gathered around, discussing in low, tense voices. Molly and Luke's presence seemed to have disturbed the fragile calm they maintained, and now their gazes turned toward them with distrust and fear. "What exactly happened to Ethan and Emily?" Molly asked, trying to keep her voice steady, though she felt a growing terror gripping her heart. "What is this curse you're talking about?" Margaret, the violinist, sighed deeply before answering. "Ethan and Emily didn't disappear. They were taken. Taken by something they awakened deep in these mountains. Something old and hungry." "Taken by what?" Luke insisted, his voice trembling with a mix of anger and fear. "You knew this the whole time, and did nothing?" "There was nothing to be done," replied an older man, his face marked by time and sorrow. "When Ethan and Emily started playing together, something changed in their music. It wasn't just talent. It was as if something was playing through them, using them to manifest. We tried to warn them, but they didn't listen. And then one day they disappeared." Molly felt a lump form in her throat. "Do you think this thing, whatever it is using their music to try to come back? Or to drag more people to where they went?" Margaret nodded, face pale in the firelight. "Yes, Ethan's music keeps playing, even after his disappearance. And every time it plays, we feel that thing's presence growing stronger. It wants more. It wants all of us." Luke, with clenched fists, looked around at the group. "Then why don't you burn the instruments, destroy everything? Wouldn't that end this curse?" The old man shook his head. "We've tried. The instruments always return, somehow, untouched and tuned, ready to play again. There's no way to destroy them, and each attempt only seems to anger the thing that controls them." The atmosphere in the cave grew denser, as if the very rock around them was pressing down, waiting to crush them. Molly and Luke exchanged glances, a silent understanding passing between them. If there was no way to destroy the instruments, then only one option remained: to confront the thing behind the music and try to free Ethan and Emily if they were still alive. "Take us to the place where it all began," Molly said, determined. "Let's face this once and for all." The group reluctantly agreed to guide Molly and Luke to the heart of the cave, where they believed Ethan and Emily had been taken. As they advanced, the temperature dropped even further, and the air became heavy, almost suffocating. The violin's music, which had been soft and melancholic before, now grew more intense, almost unbearable, as if the notes were being torn from the string. Finally, they reached a large underground chamber. In the center stood a stone altar surrounded by ancient symbols carved into the walls, symbols that seemed to pulse with their own energy, as if they were alive. Resting on the altar were two violins, one of them clearly belonging to Ethan, his initials carved into the wood. Molly stepped forward, feeling an irresistible pull toward the instrument. But before she could touch them, Margaret stopped her. "Be careful," she warned, voice laden with urgency. "Those violins, they're no longer just instruments. They're portals. Ethan and Emily must have played something, some forbidden fragment, and ended up opening a door to whatever is trapped between worlds. Luke looked around, terror etched on his face. What if? What if we play that music again, but in reverse? What if we try to close that door? We don't know what might happen, the old man said, his voice trembling. But maybe it's the only chance. Molly looked at Luke, the determination in her eyes mingling with fear. I'll play. If this is how we can stop it, then I'll play. Luke hesitated, but knew he couldn't let Molly face this alone. I'm with you. They approached the violins, feeling the air around them vibrate with an invisible energy. Molly's hands trembled as she picked up Ethan's instrument, feeling a chill run through her body. Luke picked up the other violin, and together, they began to play. The first note sounded dissonant and terrifying, like a distorted scream of pain. Cave began to tremble, and the symbols on the walls glowed intensely, casting a spectral light throughout the chamber. Molly felt as if her hands were no longer under her control, as if an invisible force was guiding her movement, compelling her to continue, even when everything in her body screamed to stop. The music intensified, and then, at the peak of the melody, a crack opened in the center of the altar. From within it, a dense, pulsating darkness began to spread, as if the very fabric of space was tearing apart. Suddenly, two figures began to emerge from the darkness, Ethan and Emily. But they were not as they had been. Their faces were pale, their eyes lifeless, and their bodies seemed almost translucent, like specters trapped between this world and the next. They moved slowly, as if struggling to cross the barrier that held them. Emily, Ethan, Molly shouted, trying to reach them, but felt a force holding her back, preventing her from getting closer. We'll get you out of here. But the figures didn't respond. Their eyes were fixed on the darkness behind them, as if something even greater was about to emerge. And then, the thing they had feared revealed itself. Colossal shadow, with no defined form, began to rise from the altar, contours twisting and contorting unnaturally. Red, glowing eyes opened within the darkness, fixing on Molly and Luke, an insatiable hunger. The thing roared, and the cave shook violently. The walls began to collapse, and the group of musicians retreated in panic, trying to escape the imminent collapse. But Molly and Luke couldn't stop. They knew that if they stopped the music now, that thing would be free to devour everything in its path. Keep playing, Molly shouted, her voice almost lost in the chaos. We have to finish the music. Luke nodded, despite the terror consuming him, and the two continued to play, each note bringing more pain and despair, but also more strength, as if they were fighting against death itself. The shadow drew closer, its eyes burning with ancient hatred, but when Molly reached the final note, a flash of light exploded from the altar, bathing the cave in a blinding glow. The shadow roared in agony as the light engulfed it, and then, in an instant, everything dissipated. The silence that followed was deafening. When the light disappeared, the cave was in ruins, with rocks and debris everywhere. But the shadow, Ethan, and Emily, they were all gone. Molly collapsed to her knees, exhausted and in shock. Luke ran to her, holding her in his arms. We did it, whispered, but his voice was weak, almost incredulous. The remaining musicians, the few who had survived the collapse, slowly approached. Margaret was crying, her eyes filled with relief and sadness. You did the impossible. Curse is broken. But Molly couldn't feel joy. Ethan and Emily were gone forever, and whatever had been in the mountains, though momentarily contained, was still there, waiting, perhaps to awaken again one day. She looked at Luke, gaze tired but determined. We can never let this story be forgotten. What happened here must be a warning to everyone. Luke nodded, holding her tightly. We won't forget. They left the destroyed cave, cold mountain air wrapping around them, as the first ray of sunlight broke through the dark clouds. Aspen was quiet, but now, that quiet seemed the prelude to a new beginning. Even so, Molly knew she would never forget Ethan's music, nor the shadow that dwelled in the depths of those mountains.